I apologize in advance for the terrible mic quality. I left my good mic at my dorm, and this is the best we're gonna get. As people grow and age and progress through life, their taste tends to change. But one thing about me that hasn't changed over the course of my life is that I love shoegaze. I mean, there's also 80s music and post-rock that have been mainstays in my music listening rotation, but out of everything, shoegaze has gotta be my favorite. I used to say my favorite genres were noise and DSBM, but I've grown as a person. I'm not nearly as miserably depressed or mentally deranged as I was when I used to listen to that stuff. That's kind of why I stopped making videos. I changed. I found things that bring me more joy than the most disturbing, eclectic, or bizarre music that I could find. I made friends, went outside, I'm in college, and I'm making a game. I don't have much time to make YouTube videos, and when I do, I don't want to spend it talking about stuff I'm not interested in. A lot of the stuff I'm into these days isn't really what fits the vibe of this channel that I established, so it's kind of discouraged me from spending time on videos. But I decided, fuck it, I'm gonna do it anyway. Shoegaze rules, and I've known that since I was 12. So today, I'm talking about the unmatched beauty of shoegaze. Today, when people ask me what my favorite genre of music is, I know that 50% of the time they'll have no idea what I'm talking about when I say shoegaze. So a lot of the time I say something with an easier to understand genre classifier that I also like. Ambient, jazz, or psychedelic rock, and you know I do love all those things. But if I had to marry a genre, I would marry shoegaze. When I tell people I like shoegaze, they always say the same thing. What the hell is that? That's a really good question. What the hell is shoegaze? It's kind of a confusing genre label, because a lot of very different music gets classified under shoegaze. You've got stuff like Failure and Deftones, which are kind of similar, but to me, personally, they just sound like spacier alt-rock and nu metal. But I guess they do still count. Apparently, Men I Trust are shoegaze, according to their Bandcamp. They're pretty good, really good actually, but they sound a lot more like home shake style R&B, but I guess that is just shoegaze R&B. And of course there's also dream pop, which used to be used interchangeably with shoegaze, and still is sometimes. But sometimes it's not. The difference generally accepted being that dream pop is a cleaner, less reverby, distorted version of shoegaze. It's really convoluted, and it would be a lot simpler to just call all of this shoegaze. Anyone can call any project whatever, but shoegaze is even more universal, it seems. No insult to any of these artists, by the way, I like them all, but it makes things really confusing. So instead of focusing on the explicit genre of shoegaze, let's try and define the sound of shoegaze. First, at the core of any good shoegaze song is a shit ton of reverb, and a varying amount of distortion. But it's not like black metal, where it sounds like a bunch of guys screaming in a cave. It's a different sort of reverb, a more spacey sort. Like when you're in the dentist or in the emergency room and they just gave you a shit ton of painkillers and everything is starting to fade into this strange, foggy haze. The music should sound like fog, I guess. The vocals, if there are any, will typically be almost impossible to make out over the guitars and bass, to the point that you may not even be able to tell what language is being spoken. The lyrics could really be about anything, but usually they're about stuff like dreams, relationships, the past, and of course, emotions. It's like if you took goth rock and post-punk and put them in a blender with an occasional side dish of synth pop and post-rock. In short, it sounds really cool. But where did this whole shoegaze thing start, anyway? Well, according to the article Glorious Noise by Jake Jenkins, and just general consensus, there were two artists who are credited with pioneering the sound that would later be called shoegaze. Cocteau Twins and the Jesus and Mary Chain. Cocteau Twins are a great band to start with if you want to get into shoegaze, though they're more dream pop. But as mentioned before, there's a lot of overlap, and they're practically the same thing. Their most popular album, Heaven or Las Vegas, is amazing and very accessible, but for my money, their 1984 album Treasure is their best. The jangly guitars and synth bells combined with Elizabeth Fraser's unique vocal style bring this oddly dark atmosphere to this album that make it such an enthralling listen. One thing about Cocteau Twins is that it's almost impossible to tell what Frasier is actually saying in any song, to the point that I genuinely thought she wasn't even saying words. She pronounces things in a, let's say, liberal fashion. She gives the music this very ethereal sound, as though an alien is beaming words into your brain, trying to get you to understand, but you can't quite put the syllables together correctly. I mean this all as a positive, by the way. Their whole discography is amazing. I highly recommend them to anyone who somehow hasn't heard of them. Admittedly, I haven't listened to nearly as much of the Jesus is Mary chain as I have Cocteau Twins. I've heard every Cocteau Twins album, but I've only heard the first two Jesus and Mary chain projects. And they're both pretty good. I just haven't branched out. Their debut, Psycho Candy, really shows off their early shoegaze sound. The drums drenched in layers of reverb drowned out by the guitars and airy vocals. A lot of shoegaze sounds like this today. So for 1985, they were really ahead of their time. Personally, they remind me quite a bit of Suicide, with more reverb. The repetitive lyrics and noisy guitars give it that almost no-wave feel. It's a good album, and it reminds me that I definitely need to listen to more of them. But let's talk about the elephant in the room. The big dog. My Bloody Valentine. Surprisingly, they aren't named after the 1981 slasher movie that my dad always mentions when I talk about them. When you mention shoegaze to someone who knows what it is, My Bloody Valentine is bound to come up. They're the most well-known shoegaze band, often credited with having invented the genre. Their album Loveless is one of the most critically acclaimed shoegaze albums ever released. Where prior shoegaze acts definitely fit the sound, My Bloody Valentine set a standard for all subsequent shoegaze artists to follow. Loveless was the album that got me into shoegaze. When I first heard it when I was 13, I had never heard anything like it in my life. It changed the way I thought about music, and I think back when the album first released, there really had never been anything quite like it before. But today, there have been so many copycats and iterations on the sound that My Bloody Valentine defined, that they really don't stand out as much. Not saying they're bad. Listening to Loveless is like playing Mario 64. It's a fun time, and it pioneered a lot of stuff that would be iterated on in the future. But in the time since its release, there have been so many better alternatives created that surpass it. I don't dislike Loveless. Far from it. It's probably at least in my top 100 albums. But there are so many shoegaze projects that came after that I love so much more. At the same time, if you want to get into shoegaze, listen to Loveless. It's a bit of an acquired taste, but that at the time unique sound still holds up today. When You Sleep is one of the greatest songs ever created, and you can't tell me otherwise. I mean, they spent like $500,000 on this album. It better be good. One thing about me, I fucking love Slowdive. While I think that My Bloody Valentine has been surpassed by later shoegaze releases, Slowdive still holds strong as one of my favorite bands. Now, Slowdive has a much cleaner and less distorted sound, at least on their albums, than My Bloody Valentine. Their demos are a different story, but we'll get to that. Souvlaki is this album that gives a simultaneous feeling of laying in the bright sun on a rooftop and riding the train home at night. It balances these feelings of darkness and light perfectly. Every song on here is amazing, but I especially love the sort of trippy machine gun, the beautifully bright When the Sun Hits, the acoustic-led closing track, Dagger, almost sounding like something by the post-rock band Mogwai. But Souvlaki is not all Slowdive has to offer. Their later album Pygmalion has a much more psychedelic experimental sound that has a slight new age vibe, if that's your kind of thing. There's also their latest album, which feels like a more synth-driven Souvlaki, which satisfies the synth-loving creature that dwells within my brain. Personally, I wasn't a huge fan of their 2017 self-titled album, but maybe check it out. I'm not the arbiter of what's good and what's bad. However, some of my favorite Slowdive songs are unreleased demos. There aren't very many good recordings of these songs, but that honestly adds to the lo-fi charm they exude. My favorite among them is Summer Days, not to be confused with Summer's Day, which is still good, it's just a different song. Summer Days is a kind of depressing song. The vocals are much more foggy than the ones on the other Slowdive tracks, and the recording is lo-fi even for demo standards. It reminds me of a lot of White Waking, by Les Rayleigh de Nundes, especially the incomprehensible lyrics. One of my favorite songs, but where that song is bittersweet and sentimental, this one feels more like you just had a really bad day and are laying on the floor as the sun sets outside, as the feeling just washes over you. But it isn't completely crushing. The chorus does lift the song's tone up a little bit. I remember the first time I found this song in, 2018 or something, and I just sat there and listened to it on loop for like 30 minutes. It hit me in a way that some very rare songs do, and etched itself into my mind. So I've talked about the big shot shoegaze artists. I mean, there's also Ride, but I don't know, they're pretty alright. Not my favorite. Nowhere is a pretty good album, but I don't have much to say about them. But now that we've established that, I want to talk about some different artists and subgenres to give a wider overview of the genre. First, falling into the very distorted camp, and an artist that I feel, while sort of copying My Bloody Valentine, feels like a natural progression. Love Lies Crushing. This band is cool. I don't know if I'm crazy, but every time I revisit their album Below Eyelash Wish, it feels like I'm listening to a different album. I don't know how, but it's something I do every once in a while. This album is not nearly as melodic as Loveless, which I know that sounds insane considering that Loveless is far from melodic itself, but this album feels almost drone-like. It also only sounds good if you're listening with headphones. There have been times when songs from this album have come on in my car and sounded like nothing was playing. To get the full experience, you need to hear this through some nice noise-canceling headphones while sitting in the dark. Something about this album, it's like the classic saying of the notes that they're not playing. And this sort of drone crossover style of shoegaze is something that noise fans will feel right at home listening to. I'll admit it, I have a soft spot for Japanese music. Call me a weeb or whatever, but I grew up watching anime and playing video games. This was inevitable. Japanese shoegaze in particular, though, is some of the best shoegaze that there is. I don't know what it is, but there's this particular bittersweet, nostalgic feeling it all exudes. A lot of this Japanese shoegaze is also criminally underrated, at least in the West. The band Mushroom Empire has this blend of math rock and shoegaze, which makes listening to their music a blast. I recommend their album Eureka. It's how I first discovered them, solely based on the awesome album cover, and the music hooked me almost immediately. Another artist that hooked me immediately is Insoluble Names. This band has a specific theme that it explores in its music that I find fascinating. They have an album, a redone version of that album, and an EP. Across their career, they explored the theme of how one's obsession with their past, specifically their adolescent years, can distract them from their present. I mean, I guess it could also just be a romanticization of that obsessive nostalgia, but either way, it's amazing music. Their album, Waiting at Time Machine, is a surprisingly catchy but still dazzling shoegaze project. On almost all their songs, they use a specific synth lead for melodies, and it works beautifully with the distorted guitars and fast-paced drumming. My Dead Girlfriend, a name that I can only assume is a play on My Bloody Valentine, surprisingly doesn't sound a lot like My Bloody Valentine, but they are very good. Their only full-length album, Hades, The 9 Stages of Change at the Deceased Remains, is yet another math rock-infused shoegaze project which I adore. Honestly, it's probably one of my favorite albums. It's like shoegaze mass of the fermenting dregs, and I don't think anything else I could say would explain how good this band is. All these other artists are much more math rock / J-rock infused shoegaze, and artists with some intense, drowned out and fast-paced shoegaze. Also from Japan is the wonderful CQ, whose album Communication Cultural Curiosity Quotient I like even more than Hades. It's only 8 tracks, but each one of those tracks have such a unique identity that makes them infinitely replayable. The opening track, Disco Crimson, is the first one I heard from the band, and it's so good. And then the rest of the album happens, and it just keeps getting better. While we're still on the topic of Japanese shoegaze, this one's a bit out of left field, I'll admit. But I don't know if I'll ever get another chance to talk about this. It's not an artist or even an album, but a single song. I'm a huge enjoyer of the Katamari series, especially their soundtracks, but strangely enough, in a PS2 demo disc of the game, there's this song without a name. That's an incredibly spacey shoegaze song that sounds like nothing else from the entire series. It's an incredible song, and the upload for it on YouTube only has about 2,000 views, at least 50 of which are probably from me. Check it out. It's a diamond in the rough. Another country with many great shoegaze bands is South Korea. But in particular, there's one band that I'd like to highlight. Paranol. They're a relatively new band, but they exploded in 2021 with their hit album, To See the Next Part of the Dream, and for good reason. This album, and all their other work, is a new frontier for shoegaze. It's a combination of that classic washed-out My Bloody Valentine style with the sun-drenched beauty of Slowdive and some emo and post-rock stylings thrown in there. It's incredible. They are probably the greatest active shoegaze band if you don't count Slowdive. And even then, they might be better. Their 2023 album, After the Magic, is probably my favorite album of the year. If you somehow haven't heard them yet, you need to check them out. You won't be disappointed. Well, maybe you will, but probably not. Recently, there's been a sort of resurgence of shoegaze mixed with electronic elements with bands like They Are Gutting a Body of Water and Your Arms Are My Cocoon. I really like this stuff. It's not quite for everyone, and a lot of it strays very far from the core sound, so much so that it might not even be classified as shoegaze anymore. But I think I should mention it, as it is relatively important. I think the biggest influence on the sound would have to be the band Sweet Trip. I'm sure most of you have heard of Sweet Trip, but if you haven't, I do highly recommend them. They have a really unique sound that sometimes borders on drum and bass and other times can be hook-filled pop shoegaze, and some really out there spacey stuff. Velocity, Design, Comfort, and You Will Never Know Why are truly great albums. It's a huge shame that the guy is allegedly pretty terrible. Good thing piracy exists. Another artist that fits this sound would be M83, a French band that blends the shoegaze guitar sound and vocals with some really awesome synth-pop vibes, at least in their earlier work. Their album Dead Cities, Red Seas, and Lost Ghosts is a great example of this shoegaze for robots, as I like to call it. And although they do leave the sound behind in their future, more popular works, they're still a good band that you should check out. The artist that I personally believe started the resurgence of this subgenre would have to be Weatherday. A great lo-fi, bedroom, emo, electronic shoegaze artist. You'll likely know about them already. Come In was one of the best albums of 2019. Its combination of crazy upbeat synths, lo-fi and often shouted vocals along with heavily reverbed and distorted guitars give it this exciting energy that still has that distinctive shoegaze sound. They also have a collaboration with shoegaze artist Asian Glow, who have also collabed with Paranol multiple times. So check them out too while you're at it. The person behind Weatherday also made a side project that indulges much more into the shoegaze under the name Five Pebbles, which is a raw but very well made EP. I highly recommend all their projects. I'm not a huge fan of hyperpop. In fact, I find a lot of it to be extremely obnoxious. However, I do respect the people who make it and enjoy it, unless they're, like, evil. Every once in a while, a song or artist will grab me. Birds Fear Death is one of those artists. They're a band that I'm a fan of, and much like these other artists, mixes electronic elements with shoegaze, specifically hyperpop-styled auto-tuned vocals. I really enjoy their work. It thoroughly satisfies a certain part of my brain. My personal favorite album of theirs being Livestream Death Compilation. Well, they actually predate Weather Day. I think my favorite artist that blends these sorts of elements together would definitely have to be Strawberry Hospital, an artist that, like a lot of these newer bands, has only one album and a few EPs. The album Grave Chimera is amazing. It blends more than just shoegaze and electronic, but also some black metal elements, and drum and bass, and auto-tuned vocals that almost sound like Vocaloid. It's certainly not for everyone, but it sounds really cool to me, like something you'd hear in an edgy AMV from 2010. This subgenre might not even be shoegaze, honestly. It certainly draws a lot more from emo, and the more commonly accepted term for it is fifth wave emo. But I feel there's a good amount of overlap between these genres, and I really like this music, and it's my video, and I wanted to talk about it. It gives me the same feelings as shoegaze, and that sound is definitely there. So, you know, if it sounds like shoegaze, I think you can call it shoegaze. If you're a fan of this channel and you're still watching, I'm almost certain you probably like black metal, at least to some extent. Although I don't really mesh with a lot of the pure, unadulterated black metal anymore, I still enjoy it from time to time. I just enjoy other things a lot more. I need to be in a specific mood, but shoegaze and black metal combined, that's a different story. I'll listen to that any day of the week. Blackgaze, as it's often called, is a kind of controversial style of shoegaze. It combines aspects of black metal, such as screamed vocals, blast beat drum patterns, and tremolo guitars, with the foggy twinge of shoegaze. I say controversial because many of the fans of black metal tend to dislike it, since it's not quite as true cult as other black metal. Some of it even sounds happy, which, you know, that can't happen. On the other hand, some shoegaze fans dislike it for the opposite reason. The screaming vocals are a bit of an acquired taste. When I first heard Death Heaven when I was a lot younger, I thought it was awful, but now I think they're amazing. Blackgaze is a cool genre of music, at least in my opinion. There are several bands I recommend in this style. Of course, there's the aforementioned Death Heaven, who are the poster child of this genre. Their album Sunbather being an amazingly beautiful album that perfectly encapsulates its name. If you're looking for something more depressing, there's the not-so-subtly named Sadness, who scratched that DSBM itch. I think at least 5 people commented about this band on my DSBM video, so there you go, I finally mentioned them. They're alright, but I'm not super into DSBM anymore. If you're into post-punk and want to hear that combined with shoegaze and black metal, I can't recommend Emissure enough. It's a side project of Alcest, another great blackgaze artist, that only has 2 albums. But those 2 albums give this awesome feeling of driving through an intense storm in the middle of an empty city covered in dense fog. It fits the album cover of the first album perfectly. But the last artist of the blackgaze style I'd like to mention is my personal favorite, Lantlos. Lantlos also has the same singer from Alcest, but I personally prefer Lantlos. One thing about them is that as their discography continues, you can really feel them come into their own, slowly breaking free from the conventions of their genre. While their early albums, especially Neon, are amazing, Their later work, starting with Melting Sun, shifts to this more uplifting and reflective sound that sounds almost nothing like their black metal roots. Listening to their discography gives this feeling that you've lived through a bunch of really depressing shit, and you're coping with it as best you can, but it still brings you down. But then Melting Sun happens, and it's like for the first time in a very long time, you feel like you can be happy and joyous. And while that melancholy will still be there from time to time, you feel free. It's something that I personally relate to a lot, and it really endears me to their music. But there's a certain other shoegaze artist that I have a certain connection to the music of. The name of this channel is probably a dead giveaway, but if you couldn't tell, I'm a massive fan of the band Have a Nice Life. I have tried many times to write the script for a video about their album Death Consciousness, but I can never get through it. I have such a personal connection to this album that a full video on it would end up getting way too personal for a YouTube video. I listened to this album every single day for like 2 years, and it helped me through a really dark time in my life that I'm glad is over. Every single song on this album is amazing, from the opening track, A Quick One Before the Eternal Worm Devours Connecticut, the namesake of this channel, to the miserable The Big Gloom, to the more intense goth rock sounding songs like Deep Deep and Waiting for Black Metal Records to Come in the Mail, the reverb-drenched drone of I Don't Love, or the acoustic-driven holy fucking shit 40,000. Every song here is a masterpiece. Trying to pick a favorite is really difficult, except for Telephony. That one's alright, but it's definitely not my favorite. If I had to say, I would probably pick Who Would Leave Their Son Out in the Sun. It's probably the simplest song on the album, just being reverb-drenched vocals and guitar, but it sets this atmosphere with so little. The lyrics are about regret and trauma, are devastating, and the imagery is incredible. It's a sad song. It's also one of my favorite songs, and every time I play it for someone and tell them it's one of my favorite songs, they ask me if I'm okay. I am. It just sounds really good, and when I wasn't okay, it was there to help me through it. But there's one more song that can be considered a contender for the best song of the album. High school was tough for me. Honestly, so was middle school. And elementary school, but that wasn't as bad as high school. The year of 9th grade was the worst year of my life, and I'm not going to get in specifics, but it's something that took a lot of therapy to get past. Then in 10th grade, things were starting to look up, and then COVID happened. 11th grade was a completely online school, and I was working a job at McDonald's, which drove me fucking crazy, along with some other negative experiences. Senior year was the year that my life finally went back to normal, that I finally became a person again and got to live my life freely, mostly unburdened by the trauma of the previous 3 years. It was the year I started this channel, the year I got my driver's license, worked a job I actually liked, and it was the year I made my first game and started the one I've been working on since then. All throughout those 4 years, I was listening to this album constantly. At my school, seniors graduated a week before classes ended, so school was still in session. The day after graduation, I went on a victory lap of sorts. I went and said goodbye to all my favorite teachers from over the years, and I drove around some places that I had memories, good and bad. During that drive, on the way to my final stop, Earth Mover came on. Earth Mover is the final song on the album, and an 11.5-minute song at that. The first half is this reflective and climactic song about ancient, ageless golems, but around 4 minutes in, the bombastic guitars and drums fade out, and we're left with a relatively clean guitar sound with vocals, where the golems, while bringing about the apocalypse, utter their only words: "We wish we were dead," and everything gets quiet for a moment. Before a piano introduces this overwhelmingly beautiful guitar section, it sounds like a perfect end credits for the album. It could be the end credits song for anything, and for me, it was the end credits song of the darkest parts of my life. I parked at my final stop as it kicked in, and sat there letting everything that had happened wash over me. The song might have depressing lyrics, extremely depressing lyrics, but that didn't matter in the moment. The sound of the music was like a beautiful sunrise of a new dawn, and as it faded out, I smiled and drove away, leaving the darkness behind, for the most part. That feeling of unmatched beauty is the pinnacle of shoegaze, and it's a feeling that all the best shoegaze artists can embody in their music, whether it be Slowdive or Paranoid, My Bloody Valentine or Lantlos, or any of the other artists I mentioned, or didn't mention in this video that I just didn't have the space for, like Title Fight or LSD in the Search for God, or Candy Claus or whoever else. That feeling of intense emotion washing over you is what makes shoegaze so beautiful. It's those moments where the fog that encapsulates the music parts for a moment, and you can see the sunshine over the horizon. That's why I love shoegaze, and that is the unmatched beauty of shoegaze. I want to thank you all for watching the video this far. I know it's been a while, and maybe it wasn't what was expected of me, but I hope you enjoyed it anyway. If you're a fan of this channel from back in the day, thanks for sticking around. But I do have to say, I'm probably not going to ever go back to making videos regularly. It's not something that I like doing as much anymore, especially the editing. I certainly missed a couple bands, some of which I wanted to talk about, but I just didn't want to make a 45-minute video. There's Julie, they're pretty new and they have some great singles. And there's Whir, and Teen Suicide, and there's so many great shoegaze bands. It's a genre I'm really passionate about, as you could probably tell, but the edit was rough on this one. Usually when I do something creative, I feel like I'm restoring a part of my soul, but when I edit a video, I want to kill the next person I see. There's also, as I mentioned before, things in my life that bring me more joy than this channel. And maybe that's selfish, but I don't know, I guess I'm not cut out to be a real YouTuber. This isn't my last video, probably not anyway, but whenever I make the next one, could be any time in the future honestly, and it probably won't be about music, it'll be different. If you do want to watch someone else who makes videos about music, one of my friends started a channel called Jam Sandwich. It's pretty small right now, and he's definitely still getting the hang of making videos, but there's more stuff to come, and I assume they'll get better with every video, so I hear. So, once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you when I see you. Happy New Year. Also, a while ago I had a Patreon. It's not open. It hasn't been open for, I think, over a year and a half. But shoutouts to Casual Chris for being the one person who gave me like $1 a month. That was pretty good. My #1 supporter. Thank you.